Excellent. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you for the warm words. And also thanks to Maurizio I've just learned something. I've just learned that I have actually built up my own early accelerator in a way. So that is, I have never seen it like that, but of course, yeah, you're right. I guess I have done that. So yeah, because besides being the CFO of that Zellmechanik company, which actually came out of one of the training programs that I established, I'm running regular training programs for exactly students, postdocs, as well as group leaders that have that curiosity into business and that have that drive, that want to go somewhere, but are exactly where you are right now, not having a clue about anything. So I'm basically training them in the basics of learning what IP means, so patents, how this whole financing thing that Maurizio was beautifully explaining is working, what actually a business model is. Of course, we're also working with that business model canvas thing, and then usually really work on the projects that my participants bring. And from that, I have, just in the preparation of that talk here counted, it's meanwhile more than 200 projects all over the world that have turned, not all of them turned into companies, that's also said to be true, but many. And it's always a pleasure to see how academic people then become entrepreneurs. Very often these academic people already have these kind of, entrepreneurial genes and spirit, and seeing that flourish is just so, for me, it brings back energy to me. So that's why it was a must for me to also join that little talk here. And I've seen how this Mac4Me whole ITN is actually, I've coached a lot of ITNs already. I have rarely seen an ITN that is really so pushing it into that direction. So I'm more than grateful that you have established it in that way. And I'm not the EU, but if it was up to me, all ITNs should have more or less that kind of, spirit. Although I know basic research is much harder to transfer than already applied ones. But there's a lot of people here now in the room, and you can count yourselves through how many of you might have the opportunity later on to become real full-time professors. And it's just a limited, the pyramid is going into that direction. So there's not opportunities for everybody, even though you might want it. Not everybody will end up there, and most people don't even want it. They want to go afterwards into industry. And all the learnings that you have in terms of what is a business model, how can we finance that, the whole understanding is also, of course, helpful if you end up in a bigger pharma or mid-sized biotech company or wherever, or even in a university hospital. They also run with money. So having a basic understanding, if it was up to me, we should learn it already in school. And if not in school, then latest in masters. And if it's not masters, then at least in the PhD programs. And therefore, I'm happy to be here and tell you something. I try to try and see if I can do this one. It's Teams again. Wait a second. Then we need to moment. I guess I need to close it once more, because if I open that now, then you won't see it.
Yeah, we see, but we see your full screen, not in presentation mode yet.
Therefore, and then we go into that direction. And we use, now you should see it, hopefully.
No, we don't see. At the moment, now it comes. Yeah. Wonderful.
So then we use this one. I mean that title as I say it. So I have done it a couple of times, and what is common in all the companies that I've either coached or even been part of is it has never been quick. So biotech and quick entrepreneurship is just not belonging together. If you do it in the life science field, even if it's only an app development, usually they also have to undergo some, certifications and trials. It's always a marathon. It's never a sprint. So I've met a couple of serial entrepreneurs, as they are called, usually from Berlin, and then they're kind of, I don't know, 22, 24 years old. And I always wonder, how is that even possible if you're only 24 to have already established a couple of companies in parallel? Yeah, because they've chosen other areas. I'm now 41, so and I still haven't sold my first company. So that's what I maybe can say. So if you're in biotech and you want to become an entrepreneur, you should be able to run the longer way. Let's start why I actually care and basically why everybody of us shall care. You are performing academic research. So working with me, what do you think is necessary to perform your academic research? What is the underlying basis of everything? Someone? Just speak, because I can't see you. I only can hear you speak. Someone talk to me? Someone still there?
Yeah, we are here, so we can all hear you.
Okay, so what is necessary to that you are able to do your academic research? So what do you need for that? You are all now, yeah, researchers. What do you need to make your research happen? Just give me some guesses.
Well, for sure, you need funding.
You need funding. You need actually money, because no matter what people usually say that, okay, I need a lab, right? I need consumables, right? I need some mouse, I need knowledge, etc., etc. But what you actually need is correctly some funding, some money. Where does that money come from? Do you take your own ones, or where does the money come from?
Like agencies like the European Union, or sometimes I think also companies, no? Industries.
It might be companies too. Exactly. I usually love to take that picture here because number one, this lady everybody knows, and number two, I didn't have to change my slides for quite a while. Meanwhile, we should then, of course, you're right, EU. In ITNs, it's always the EU that needs to come there, and then we have this guy down left now, here, at least in Germany. I could do it for all the partners, but then my picture is already full. They themselves, do they invest their own money, or where does the money come from that they invest? Someone there?
Yes.
Again?
Taxes?
Taxes, correct. Taxes is correct. And the majority of taxes, actually, sometimes people tell me, we also have to pay taxes when you're your own researchers. True, we also pay taxes on our own salaries, but if you're employed by the state and you pay basically taxes, that is just using tax money to pay taxes, which I personally find pretty ridiculous, but that's how our state funds. But the majority of taxes actually coming from industry. And as the person just before mentioned very correctly, there are smart researchers who also go directly to industry, so into that direction. So then you have this kind of third-party funding. And if we would leave it now here, that's a pretty one-side track. And the reason why we actually need to think about tech transfer, and to be precise, tech transfer and knowledge transfer, is because we need to get that into a circular direction. Because if you understand that correctly here, the better or the more and more effective we perform these tech transfer and knowledge transfer activities, the more money is available to perform our own academic research. So even if you have PIs, and that happens regularly, that are not so much interested into, trying to patent something, or maybe trying to think about, could there be something commercially that we could build out of the stuff here? Even if they're not completely interested in that, this little graph here, that little picture, is actually explaining why they should still care, because it's, if they do it correctly, to their own benefits. And for me, the personal reason is, of course, I have started this whole track because in the end, and I guess some of you have the same motivation, what we actually want to achieve is to improve the lives of patients, right? So we want to bring out better diagnostics or better treatments in whatever way, cell therapies or new drugs or whatever. And this is not done in the academic world, but somehow you have to channel it through industry. Hospitals are basically part of the industry, if we like it or not, but that's the case. And if we want to bring those therapies really to the patients and create that kind of impact, this is what needs to be done. And that's why I'm so into that, why I always spend my time to explain that little graph here. I call it the golden circle of tech transfer, because if you understand the beauty of it and the real concepts behind it, it's so clear why we actually have to create more awareness and provide more knowledge to all academic researchers, not only the PhD students, but basically this should also be understood by every professor and PI.
What I do, can I just make a comment?
Sure.
Because one of the major hurdles or reluctance that researchers feel is that with this tech transfer and knowledge transfer, it also hinders a lot of academic research, because for this money you also, and for this tech transfer, you need to have patents and IP, which is then really solid and restricted, and you cannot openly share this to improve your collaboration with other academic researchers. So that is the kind of reluctance that researchers feel not to go into this type of research. So how do you see this?
Fully understand that, but it's only true in part, because patents are exactly there for providing you the ability to, as soon as the patent has, or the patent application, or even only the invention disclosure towards your university or research institution, when they have the right processes, you're pretty quickly on the safe side to speak about it publicly then. Of course, there's always a big question. IP is only that one thing. One part of IP is also whether you should better not speak about anything. But to what I have seen regularly is that there is a dramatic fear of, I'm not able to perform my horizontal kind of tech transfer anymore. That means publishing my papers. That's what the KPI is that I actually get my money for. But that's not true. If you align the processes in the correct way, if you know how to do it, and if the processes are established at the university in a good way, so they know which patent attorneys to hire, they know, okay, they have their processes established. Let's get to that part here, where this IP assessment is correctly done. I don't know if the IP assessment, whether you see my mouse here, but this part here, if they have the processes in the right set up in the right way, then you're not hindered. I have seen cases where the researchers were actually planning to go to a conference, I think 3 days later, and they had to, they were pretty sure that it might be that they want to do something more out of it. And it was clear that they should go for a patent application for that. So they quickly drafted this kind of invention disclosure form, submitted it to our technology transfer office at the university, and they had the right processes already set up, that they knew, okay, we need to hire that and that patent attorney. Okay, I already told them this is the patent attorney that we need to have for that. And then the patent attorney was actually pretty excellent and quickly drafted a quick application. You have these kinds of quick applications that can be changed a bit afterwards to have this priority date. That's how it's called. Everything before everything that is basically coming after the priority date doesn't matter anymore, as soon as you've submitted that first application. But you have to know that. And that's why I'm there, for this kind of awareness creation, that this kind of basic knowledge is available to the scientists, because now it's not completely true. You can easily do that. And now back to the part. Yes, it might be that sometimes it would be smarter for the company, or for a potential company, that we keep some stuff secret, but that's rare. So rather what happens is that the patents that are drafted in the very beginning, when you're still at university, very often in the later company life, do not matter at all anymore, because they're usually not protecting the core then that comes later. That's just all over the development. So I'd say it's, if you're aware that something comes up that might be commercially relevant and you want to go to that direction, there is ways where how you can still do your academic life in exactly the way that you want to do it, and still go into that direction of commercial evaluation or commercial exploitation, so to say. But as you can see already from the picture here, yeah, you're right. So besides the scientific discovery that you are all very well aware of, this is where you feel comfortable. It is quite a stretch, and you're leaving your comfort zone if you run into that tech transfer process, because the awareness is just the first step. You have to learn about all these patents, trademarks, and meanwhile also a lot of about copyrights, because a lot of new technologies that are coming up are usually running in parallel with some kind of software development, coding, evaluation, analytics stuff, whatever. So that's the copyright action. Then you have to be knowledgeable. Okay, how is that basically this evaluation of tech and commercial potential even running? So what does that mean, a value chain? What does that mean, finding a problem to my solution? What does that whole thing mean if I speak about a business model? What is all behind it? So I'm grateful for Maurizio that he already touched this point. And then in the next step, you even have to understand, okay, there's differences whether I want to build my own company, that is actually basically spinning off a university and building your own startup company, or whether it would be smarter to try and find an established company, be it big or be it medium-sized or maybe even a small one, where you can license your technology to, so that you don't do everything yourselves, but basically you hand it over to someone who can do it. So when do you do the one and when do you do the other, and how do you evaluate the whole thing? This needs to be evaluated also in that whole thing. And underlying of all of that is the funding process, which completely changes, because of course you are used to writing grants, and you have to learn it, and that's part of an academic life. But writing a basic research grant is something completely else than writing a validation grant, where you already rather think into that market potential, competitors analysis, business model structuring, etc., etc. And you're still in the grant process. If you even go further, you've learned that just from Maurizio, there's all these venture capital things, there's all these business angels, Kickstarter, crowdfunding. So there's a complete new world. And still, I'm 100% convinced, and I mean, I've done it all the time, if you're a researcher, be it in the medicine field, be it whatever, life sciences, biotech, chemistry, whatever, getting on top the knowledge of business, it's not necessarily super easy, but it's possible. And I would say it's fairly easy, because the stuff that you've learned before is much more complex. Trying to do it the other way around, and I had these cases also from time to time, so being a business person and then trying to learn how all of that biotech thing works, doesn't work. So it is possible. It's a new world, yes. It's a new vocabulary, yes, but it's possible. It's easy to understand how these things function. You just have to, start getting into it. And therefore, I'm also fully agreeing with you, and also with Maurizio, the earlier you can start with that, getting that kind of knowledge, the better for you. I am still also convinced that that comes a bit later. When you do necessarily the person who can answer all of that perfectly, but you know which questions to ask. And when you don't know what you don't know, that's hard to do. So these programs can at least enable you, or they should enable you, to be aware of what you don't know, and then you can ask the right questions to ideally people who have done it already, and they can give you the answers. Please read. You might think now, okay, it's a statement of 1985, maybe not true anymore. I have to unfortunately tell you that it's even more true right now. So the biotech scenery is right now a pretty hard field to finance. So it's still so true. And that's why I say, okay, the only thing that you can do against that is staying optimistic, of course, and still trying it. And then maybe learning from the people who have done it already, to not necessarily repeat stupid mistakes that others have already done, but to try and prevent them. And that's why I'm there, and trying to tell you a bit about the mistakes and maybe also some about the good practices that I have experienced over the last 50 years. And therefore, I would say, since it's a marathon and not a sprint, let's start running. On the first 100 meters, what I can only recommend, start doing ASAP. So as soon as you start, is addressing the right problem. What do I mean with that? It's that kind of problem solution fit. So whenever I start working with very early projects, people usually come with solutions. They have developed a new technology, they have kind of a new pathway, they have sorts of everything. But then when I ask them, okay, so what are you actually really solving in terms of problem? Who has that problem right now? And how are these people solving the problem right now? It's very often that this is the hardest thing to answer. So if you find it difficult to answer, don't worry. It's in our field, in our area, the biggest step in the beginning to do. So the question to answer is, who is actually your customer? Because that's the person who has the problem is in the end the customer. That can be in two ways. If Maurizio has already mentioned some of that, since I haven't been part of it from the very beginning, just give me a short sign and then I go on. It could be B2B or it could be B2C. B2B is the business-to-business field. B2C is the business-to-customer. So very often when I have researchers, they say, I have developed a new idea for a new drug for, I don't know, cancer or whatever, or you with the macrophages for the metastasis in breast cancer for now. Then they tell me, okay, when I ask who is the customer, they usually say, of course, the patient. And that's just not true, because the patient is the user in the end, and not even the user. He is the one, or she is the one who is basically benefiting from it. But the real customer to that might be the hospital, or might be the doctor. It might even be that you have to involve the insurance companies as well. So that is the classic B2B setting, where in the end you have to address quite a lot of different people and entities to be able to get your product to the market. And that's so different than the B2C setting, where it's business to consumer, because these two worlds work completely differently. You are yourselves usually aware about the B2C things, everything coming from, I don't know, Apple MacBooks to Gucci bags to, I don't know, washing machines, TVs, everything that you are constantly interacting with is of course a B2C setting, because you are yourselves in your private lives also a customer, right? So you are C, and you are much more aware of that kinds of activities in terms of marketing, for example, because you are the one who is addressed. But the B2B market in general is much, much bigger. But you are not aware of that, because this is, for example, these big machines running, I don't know, building new cars. I'm in Germany, so building new cars, but you are not aware how big these machines are. But with B2B, you need to be aware that, as said, it's not one person that you address, but it's a couple. And these different kinds of partners on the back end need to be addressed in different ways, because the financing person in the hospital has other interests than maybe the doctor. The finance person probably wants to have it as cheap as possible. The doctor might want to have it as side effect free as possible, while the nurse who is applying all the things might want it to have it as easy applicable with not repeated applications or administrations. So then you have to figure out who wants what. And that all runs into that problem solution fit, because when you're working on your solution, this needs to be addressed. And that's not so easy, because a lot of different people in the B2B setting might even have contradictory wishes, and that needs to be somehow aligned. Asking what's the problem and how you solve it, how they solve it currently. It's in the metastasis field, of course, unfortunately still rather easy, because there is simply not a solution yet. And I wonder, that's something that I want to know. Then I try to not speak about everything until 6 p.m. because I want to know from you a general overview of how far are you, and how can I help you to make it quicker. But yeah, for now, I think you are definitely on the right way, that there is currently no solution, but there needs to be one. Sometimes there's no solutions for something, but there also doesn't need to be one. So I have seen a couple of cases where there was simply no interest in stuff that has been developed. And then you have to ask yourself how much you are better, what's your unique selling proposition, and also for the sometimes problems are addressed that need a solution, but let's say the pain for the customer is so low that they rather live on with that kind of pain than paying something to basically solve the pain. And this is something that here I would say is not necessarily given. If I take the Zellmechanik example, that was a bit harder, and now I have to turn everything around. With Zellmechanik, actually pretty briefly, we have developed a research device that can measure the stiffness of single cells in a high throughput fashion. So some of you might know this AFM, atomic force microscope solutions, where when you're good, you have this kind of cantilever and then you dip on these cells, and from this dipping you can analyze how stiff a cell is. If you were really good, you made 100 cells per hour. We have developed a technology where we can measure 1,000 cells per second, and with that increase of high throughput, actually, we were enabling it to become a technology that can potentially be used in a clinical setting as a biomarker. Now, the problem is with that kind of technology, it's a solution. This is a classic solution. And the thing is, for this answer of so what? So which problem are we actually addressing? I still don't have an answer. We still haven't managed. We have just celebrated 10 years we are existing now for 10 years. We're cash positive all the time, so we are really making enough profits to be able to further strive and develop, but we have not made that problem solution fit done so far. We are always constantly looking for new applications, so new questions, and a lot of researchers are meanwhile working with our technology and always come up with new fancy ideas, what we could basically analyze, etc. And then we in the back usually make that kind of, okay, who's then the customer, what's the problem? So this whole question that I told you here, how much better would we be? Is there, even if we have a kind of new diagnostic tool, is the doctor in the back then even able to make a better, clinical decision also? Because sometimes, it might be that you tell the doctor with that new analytics, the patient will die in 3 weeks if we've established that. But unfortunately, there's not even a solution yet for that. So there is simply no treatment. Then it also doesn't make sense to have a better diagnostics, because it's not of worth. No one would be willing to pay anything for that. So this is the whole setting that you need to answer. Why we are still striving is because we have a lot of curious researchers that use actually the device itself to ask a lot of new questions. But that's rather unusual. So it's not the common standard. Usually you have to find that problem solution fit earlier. Now that's just the first.
Can I ask whether then, is that not sufficient to have just curious researchers that pay for your method, and rather than having it more implemented yet, at least? Because maybe the knowledge is not, so the knowledge translation is not yet there.
Yes and no. So we are in an actual situation where we have this kind of blue ocean strategy. That's what it's called. So nobody really has the technology that we have, so we can still work on it, and we have the time to spread the technology in our speed. The point is, if you don't have that problem solution fit, only working with curious scientists is just not a very big market. So if we want to have really this scale up that you are able to have a big company, where we're now 7 people, right? But if you really want to build a big company out of that, if you really want to scale it up and make something of value, where also investors come and where you can make it simply bigger, quicker, bigger, then you need a better problem, because it's also limited. So the amount of people that are going to purchase that kind of device was limited, and we've just recently, a month ago now, released the second kind of generation of devices that is much smaller. So the first one was really big. The second one is now much smaller, but will only be able to analyze blood, and with very limited setting, turnarounds, etc. So it's pretty fixed in what you can analyze. That opens up the market to go to the more clinical researchers who really have very specific questions and don't need to tune it to any particular application. But also there, the market is just limited. So let's say we started in a niche, and it's very common if you start a business to start in a niche But if you want to make it bigger, you need to find the problem. And in particular, if you want to have investors later on board, you need to address something that can be big. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Now, imagine we would find a problem that is feasible to be analyzed, technological-wise, to be analyzed with our technology and really give something of value. Then also there, the market needs to be accordingly big, because of course for all this what would come afterwards, like the clinical trial settings, phase 1, 2, 3, preclinics, etc., the whole certification process and then rolling it out, there's a lot of money involved in that, millions, several millions. And if the market in the end, so you would address a very tiny orphan disease, for example, okay, orphan diseases has easier the limitations are a bit better there, so they make it easier to get quicker to the market. Still, if the market is too small, investors might not go for it, because as Maurizio said, for that 1 million that they invest, they want to have 10 million back. Now, if you need to invest 10 million or maybe even 20 or 50 million, which is rather the case if you go for a drug development, then you can imagine how much the investor wants to have back times 10. And if the overall market on the world is not even that big, then how should that ever be feasible? So that's a bit why this problem solution fit is essential to think through. And that's why researchers alone usually don't make it as a customer. So this is only the first 100 meters and we're already at, okay, 35. Let's see. Yeah.
Hi, I had one more question about this. So you mentioned about total addressable market. For deep tech technology in general, for example, when the problem itself was quite obscure in the beginning part, how do you establish the total addressable market in a problem that has been solved quite recently? Because I can imagine if people just kind of accept the problem the way it is, it can be difficult to establish that there is a really big market, even though, so it might be able to solve a big problem, but in principle, if you look at the current market, it might look quite small.
Very good question. It's tough. The answer is it's tough. And by the way, the total addressable market is already not saying anything about what you in the end will really address. So what basically this TAM, TOM, SOM, so the total addressable market, the servable addressable market, and really the one that you in the end will really catch, they get smaller and smaller. So if already the total addressable market, the TAM, is tiny, then I would not recommend to go for any investor. For yourselves, if you do it the bootstrap way, and maybe I should mention that with Zellmechanik, we went the bootstrap way. We did not have any, and until today, we don't have any investors on board. So for us, it was, I mean, of course, would have been great if we knew that the TAM was super big. But in the end, we wanted to know whether we can make it work, whether someone is interested. And from there, we basically didn't go top down, but bottom up and started our way. And then in general, the total addressable market, I would say, is even still increasing. And with every new application, with every new integration of customer requests. So for example, we started out with only having this mechanocytometry, so basically the RTDC, real-time deformability cytometry, where we really only measure the stiffness of cells, and pretty quickly, because it's measured in a microfluidic fashion, it's clear that it's somehow flow cytometry. So people came to us and asked, okay, by the way, can we also have the fluorescence markers in there? And then we started to develop the fluorescence module. And that, of course, made the whole TAM, this total addressable market, simply bigger, because more people would then be willing to, go for using our devices instead or on top of a fax machine, for example. So that's how when you start small, maybe diversification of the product pipeline might be a solution to increase the customer base. Is that answering your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
It's really interesting how the TAM can be pushed by developing new technologies. But I also imagine, for example, in general, the idea of pushing TAM by developing new technology can be an expensive affair, as compared to the situations where the TAM is rather pre-established by existing technologies.
Yeah, yes, but what you also have to understand is that usually you are in a setting where you have competition anyways, and competition will also further develop new. They will diversify as well, so they also work on their technologies and go there. So the worst thing that you could do is thinking that, okay, I have a big thumb and then I can basically lean back and do nothing. That's nonsense, because a big thumb is just very attractive that a lot of competition is going to enter as well, and then your final little piece of the whole overall cake is just getting smaller and smaller. Therefore, you always have to be curious and develop further and try to increase the thumb, because it will be smaller anyways because competition appears. So that's just a logic of the market. You see, we're still at the first 100 meters. We will never finish this marathon. Okay, so the first 100 meters. Now let's get to the 200 meters. It's still short distance running. I would say the second 200 meters, you need to learn how to handle your university. Why? Because as we've already discussed, patents are something that need to be taken into consideration. And if you don't take away anything from this little presentation that I give here, besides my golden circle, please, also remember that part. Patent first and then publish later. And yes, there needs to be a little time in between, but it doesn't have to be years that you are unable to publish your academic research. It can be even only days if the processes are the right ones. Nevertheless, if you have already spoken about it publicly before you patent, then you're infringing with patent criterion number 1, which is novelty. And I don't know if you had already some patenting basics, but what usually, so how is that working with the patents? You're drafting your patent application, or better, the patent attorney is usually drafting the patent application. This is submitted to either the national or the European or the worldwide WIPO patent office. And then there, the patent officer, what they usually first do is, okay, I check for novelty. How do they do that? They check who is the applicant. So basically the inventor, which is usually your professor or something. Then they go to PubMed and look in PubMed the latest publications that were drafted. And then what they love to do is look into that I hate it Outlook section. So this little tiny last 2-3 sentences in a publication where the researchers then describe, and by the way, we could also use that kind of thing and could open up new questions in XYZ. And then already revealing actually what is then later on just coming, and therefore destroying their own novelty criteria just because of that little section. Therefore, I'm really not a fan of the Outlook section, or if you draft it super carefully, because that's how actually if patents get rejected due to infringing with the novelty criterion, it's usually done by the inventors themselves, that they publish it already somewhere. And it might not only be a publication, also going to conferences and speaking at conferences. You already have your poster abstract books there. Poster abstract books are available, so you can watch them. And if then the details are already described there, it's also, and they're basically published before you submit your patent application, also novelty infringing. But I would say this is the more obvious things. There's other stuff which is not so obvious. And I come up now with a business idea that no one of you, please, is going to do, because it will, or if you do, I wasn't the one who gave you the tip. You are researchers, and as researchers, you yourselves have, I hope so, you have working contracts with your universities. And inside of these working contracts, you usually have confidentiality clauses, so that whatever you get to learn there, you need to treat confidential. But sometimes, inside of your seminar presentation, so I guess everybody of you has these research seminars, sometimes also there's master students or bachelor students who don't have a working contract and who are not under confidentiality. So when they sit inside of these meetings, and if they're smart and you present your stuff, which later on shall become a patent application, then they could draft down with a little note of which date is there, so the date indication of when you've set that. And then inside of their notebooks, when you then go for your patent, the patent is granted and you sell that patent for, I don't know, €1 million to Amgen. If they are nasty, these bachelor or master students, they then could go basically to Amgen and say, listen, that was already there, or to the patent office, listen, it was already there. And they had already spoken about it, so it wasn't novel anymore. I have heard already about that because they are not under confidentiality. So they could basically prove that you had already spoken, and that's then considered to be publicly before the date of the patent application. And therefore, the whole patent would basically be diminished. They are not smart if they do this. They would be much smarter if they would go to you and say, listen, I have that. And if you don't want me to basically prove that, or if you want me to burn that kind of lab book, please pay me 10,000 euro. So they should not do that. Therefore, this is not a business idea that I told you, but that's a theoretic case that could happen. Not so theoretic though, because meanwhile, investors have learned about these cases that happened, and investors are interested in before they invest this 1 million euro into you, they will put you under a so-called due diligence. So they look into all the papers and check for the technology that you have there, and of course also for the legal due diligence. And inside of these legal due diligences, you have to prove that nothing like that could happen. And you signed it. You gave them a guarantee for that. And yeah, don't play with it. Make it safe. All I want to say is make it safe, that whatever you have is really then safe. And when you have externals joining your seminars, and consider everybody who has not a working contract to be an external, because they are not under confidentiality, just draft a one-pager and tell them, okay, everything described inside of the seminars or whatever you learn here is considered to be confidential. Let them sign this and just put that into a folder, and that's it. Then you're on the safe side and nothing can happen. Okay. Next, the role of your TTO and the professor. Toughest topic of all, because it happens over and over and over again. So first, the TTO. The TTO stands for the Technology Transfer Office. So this is actually the people that you basically inform, okay, we're interested in building a company, and when you have a patent application, you draft it, you send it there. Also, when they're good and have established processes, they help you in writing grants for a validation grant application, etc., etc. So they are usually your supporter, and they love to support you because, of course, they are evaluated. Their KPI is bringing out the people, bringing out technologies, basically bringing out startups as well. So they're your full supporter, and usually they are very helpful. Unfortunately, there comes the point where you are going to negotiate as a startup person with the university about that patent, because the patent that you yourself have drafted and applied for then needs to somehow be transferred from the university to your startup. Why? Because you are only the inventor. The patent itself belongs to the university. So your university is the official owner. They have the ownership of the patent. But to be able to work with it when you become a startup, you need to have the right to work with it. So as a company, therefore, this either ownership or at least a license needs to be transferred to the startup. Now, the university doesn't give that out for free, but they want to have either shares of your company for it, or they want to become a silent shareholder. Usually they want to have some upfront payments. Very often they want to have then license fees, parts of the revenues that you generate. There's different kinds of things. Now, what you don't know is usually that person that just has helped you to draft all these things and to get there suddenly becomes the partner on the other side of the table that you're going to negotiate with. And if they're smart, they don't let you feel that. So you still feel very safe, and you did not understand that suddenly their interests have changed and that they're suddenly playing on the other side. And that's something that you just need to understand. This is going to happen, and you need to be aware of that. Our university has meanwhile started to have different kinds of divisions inside of the TTO, so that you at least don't have that in one and the same person, but still, the university, which is in the beginning your supporter, might become your enemy is the wrong word, definitely the wrong word, but definitely the challenger for your whole stuff. And the same might be true for your professor as well. That's now for the professors who are listening. Yeah, I could say shut down, but you're probably now curious. The I mentioned already when you apply for a patent, the first step is you have your invention done, and then you think it could be worth a patent, and then you write this invention disclosure form. This invention disclosure form is actually 1, 2, 3 pages, depends on the university, where you describe what has been invented in a brief format. And if there's collaboration partners, for example, because you have done that together with another university, will be the collaboration partner. And then there's this small section where you have to describe with percentages who are the inventors and what kinds of percentage did each inventor contribute to that whole patent. And then, of course, your professor, you're not the PhD students, your professor will tell you that they have probably minimum 50%. Usually they ask for more, 60, 70, 80, because they're the professors. Might not be true, but you somehow have to agree on that because you're PhD students and you want to have your PhD at a certain time point. And negotiating hard here might make your life harder afterwards. The problem is, there's 2 problems. The professor does that because they're smart, and they know that whatever comes in afterwards in terms of revenues from the exploitation of that patent. So, for example, that patent is then sold to a bigger company for €1 million. Then from these revenues come in, total, gross, from that 1 million, 30% of that go to the inventors. That's the so-called inventor's fee. And these 30%, that would be 300,000 now, are subdivided amongst the inventors according to these percentages that you have mentioned inside of your invention disclosure form submission. So that means if the professor asks there for 50%, that person will run out with 150,000. And therefore they negotiate hard to have high percentages there. Now the problem is the following. Also that part is already aware to a lot of companies. And if this thing happens to be untrue, which could be proved by lab books, etc. again, then also this represents a case where the whole patent could be deleted afterwards and basically sued in a way. So if that is done in the wrong way and that's just, I'm not making it up, these cases exist, where basically then your patent was sold to company. And let's take Amgen again. Your patent is worth 1 million and Amgen has paid 1 million for that. You are happy now with whatever you got. Unfortunately, Amgen has big competitors, and the competitor of Amgen realized, okay, they have the patent and we want them to, Amgen has a huge advantage of that. We don't want to have them the advantage. So therefore we sue actually the patent that it's not even allowed to exist anymore, because we figured out that this kind of invention percentages that were there in the beginning, and they have to be mentioned also towards the patent offices, was wrong. Then basically this lying in the beginning could be the reason why the whole patent gets deleted, and then actually the university would have to pay back that 1 million to Amgen, and probably Amgen might also sue one of you, maybe even the professor. Therefore, remember that case. If you ever get into the situation to negotiate with your professor about that, and you feel it's a bit the David versus Goliath situation, explain it, why it's essential to be not lying here, but basically tell the truth, because otherwise the whole patent might run into huge trouble. And that brings then, in turn, you, yourselves, and also the university into trouble. I hope that was clear. The IP due diligence process I mentioned already. So this is basically where the people before they have, or the investors before they run through that, they will look into these things as well. And then I think I have mentioned that here as well. So if you negotiate with the university about that license deal, you will have upfront payments. You have to pay shares for the university. Shares for the university are a big issue because investors, of course, don't want any let's say, inactive shares, ideally. So investors love to give you shares for the people who really actively work in the company and want to make, create value within the company. But what you also see very often is that professors, they don't even want to go into the university and into the company, but who stay 100% at the university, want to have shares from that company because they have, been part of it and they had the idea or whatever. sometimes even significant amounts of shares. And that's what investors just don't like, because they call it dead capital, dead shares. They are not, let's say, shares should not be given out for history. Shares should be given out for the future. And that's how investors basically act. If you stay inside, they are happy if you keep the majority of shares, so more than 51%. And whatever is given away is basically limiting you from having these kinds of 51 or even more percentages, and therefore they don't like it. Okay. And also for grants, this should be, you should be able to still to go for it. And grants compatibility, you need to check that. You have heard about TRLs already. I think I've mentioned them also in the next slide a bit. But sometimes you still need to be a university project. Sometimes they already need to be out, and you need to know which stage is which. We're still at 200. I speed up a bit. Technology readiness, you have learned already. So it's basically that kind of trying to get into a minimum viable product. So don't try to be the perfectionist, because it's just not working. Try to make it as quick as possible. Test your idea. Ideally also fail quickly and then adapt, and basically test it again. So this kind of rapid prototyping is necessary. Technology readiness levels you had from Maurizio. And what I also oftentimes see is basically this kind of underestimation of time and effort, and therefore money. So whatever you think, how long it might take, and that is true for a business, minimum as much as for your own research activities. And I'm pretty sure, you just started with your PhD thesis, but you might have had the experiences already before that you thought, okay, within your master thesis, you might, within that 3 month or 5 month, I will make it there. Everything takes longer. Everything just takes longer than you estimated. And whatever you feel right now as a gut feeling, take it ×2, maybe take it ×5. And then you're more in the right direction of how much time it will take. From there, we run now to mid-distance running, where we come to the financing strategies. These ones had been mentioned. I don't know whether Maurizio went into the examples of bootstrapping versus venture capital. So you have that strategy follows finance kind of low budget model. That means, in other words, you have some X, 10,000 euro on your accounts. How far can I get with 10,000 euro? Because I want to use it. You don't get any big money model, which is the opposite, where you simply say, okay, I need to have the drug out for the drug development and the clinical trials. I need 20 million. So therefore, I go to a venture capitalist and they need to finance that. As I've mentioned already, with Zellmechanik, we went the bootstrapping way. So in the beginning, back in 2013, actually, I call it moonlighting. So I worked from 6 p.m. onwards. I was paid in beer. This is not working anymore. Now I take wine. No, it's not true. And of course, we try to really check, is it possible to somehow, without any external financing, get in? When we received our first request really for delivering one of the devices, so we basically had our first paying customer, huge milestone. Maurizio was mentioning traction. This is clear traction. And we had the luck of having a rather rich dad of one of our co-founders who gave us a 60,000 loan, 60,000 euro loan, with which we could purchase all the materials. One device needs to have, for example, an own size microscope inside. You know how much size microscopes cost, so you have to have a certain amount of starting capital to even be able to build your first device. And as soon as this device was built, sold, and then the customer paid us, we immediately paid back these 60,000 to the dad and used the rest of the money to bit by bit purchase more material and build more devices. And from that, step by step, that's why it's called bootstrap financing, bit by bit, we increased it. And now we have, I'm the CFO, we have a pretty luxury kind of buffer on the accounts so that I can easily say, okay, the next 3 years, I don't have to stress out with anything. So that's the one thing. Finance follows strategy, where you go for venture capital. Usually it runs differently. The venture capitalists invest quite a lot of money, but this kind of money that they invest, they also want you to partly you need to burn it, cash burn rate it's called. So you need to hire more personnel. So you're quicker in building up bigger teams, having bigger labs, having clinical trials set up, et cetera, and therefore you need to grow bigger. Funding stages, I hope that Maurizio has mentioned that. I will not use that. If you want to have that presentation afterwards, I'm happy to share it so that you can go into more details here. If you look at that Zellmechanik, we then started in 2015, as said, we built research devices, we were bootstrapped. What I have to say is that another company that I have the last 5 years, if you contact me on LinkedIn, you will see that the last 5 years I've helped building another company as well, which was called Dynabind. And in the first instance, it looks same, but in essential parts, it was different. So we didn't go for devices, research devices, but we were rather in the therapeutics field. We used an old technology and improved it. And most importantly, it wasn't bootstrapped, it was venture capital financed. And we come to that later where the difference was actually. To be able to have all of that, what you also need to be, and now we're minimum on the 1,500 meter mid distance, you need to have your right partners because you will not cover the whole value chain of that. So you will not put everything into running, but you need to figure out what do you really keep in-house in terms of activities and what do you outsource. So for example, stuff like bookkeeping and taxation, etc., you outsource. You don't learn it yourselves. Also, if you go for clinical trials, you hire people that are going to do that with you because they are doing it a couple of times. And with that, you really need to fine-tune it, get experts on board, and understand that sometimes you run into that David versus Goliath situation where you need to figure out how to circumvent that. And if you're the small part, get big partners on board that help you navigating. Everything of that is all relying on trust. I don't have the time to go into details here, but if you want to know about trust a lot more, I highly recommend one of my favorite books from Stephen R. Covey, The Speed of Trust. Read that. It really gives you a lot of details, not only about personal, your own self-trust, etc., and basically trust from person to person, but also how an organization is building up trust. Now we get to the 5,000 because that's my favorite topic, and team is so essential that investors say they would always invest into high-level teams, even if they only have a mediocre technology, but never the other way around. A mediocre team, be it the best technology that has ever been developed by a mediocre team, will not make it run. Therefore, the team is everything. And with your team, you need to figure out everything running about culture. I won't go into details now anymore because time is up, but figuring out your team composition, how you work, what are your values that you really have in common is such an essential part. Your teammates, we're together now for 10 years. These 4 guys that I founded with, they're my business husbands. I have 4 business husbands. That is so essential that this is aligned well in good and in bad times. So it's really comparable with a marriage, that putting efforts into that is key, is even more important than any patent application.
I'm sorry, we have to, I have to interrupt because, well, I think this is a wonderful moment to stop, even though it's only the first 5 kilometers, which is still easy if you're going for a marathon, I know. But I would love to ask you another time to really continue if you're willing to do so, because I think it's really very important for our students to have the full marathon. And this would be a great moment, just because this team building, that is, of course, a crucial part, not only for the company, but also for a consortium to start developing such hopefully such products. So it's I think it's really great to hear you and your enthusiasm, and I really think that we would need to have you in one of our future webinars, because I think there are so many other aspects that we will need to learn from in the years to come. But we are just in the first webinar, so we still have a couple of years to go. And thanks a lot for the moment, Nadine. And I wish you a wonderful evening.